we have Stephanie with us, Stephanie Johnston, who is quite interesting because she's bringing together her expertise in the arts themselves, having studied in the arts herself, and then the Dharma, profoundly devoted to the Dharma, to Punlap Rinpoche, to Khenpo Rinpoche, and having journeyed with the Dharma so profoundly, and have been reflected on Buddhist visual literacy, which I think is very important nowadays because we have so many images coming at us from every which way that we have to develop some kind of literacy. And here specifically about Buddhism. So welcome, welcome everybody. And I will leave now the voice to Stephanie. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Dion. And also thank you for inviting me to share this journey and exploration that has culminated in this little phrase of Buddhist visual literacy. So the title for this talk this evening, which you could show the first slide, please. Oh, yes. Yes. And hello, everybody. Sorry, you can tell I'm slightly nervous. And also hello, everybody online. Okay. So you can see, I titled, this is actually a précis of a 9-day course that's taught at a Shudra that began by this Shudra called Natarta Institute, which has similarities with Rangjung Yeshe Institute, although it's not degree granting. It's been running since 1996. It was started by Punlap Rinpoche, and this series of Buddhist visual literacy courses was developed for their Science of Creativity track. And this talk is meant to highlight maybe the main points of the intro course. It's kind of daunting to try and just condense it down into short talk. So I hope that the points connect and that they bring some kind of pleasure, additional pleasure and play in looking at art and also pretty much anything for that matter. So the title of this is Symbolizing the Awakened Heart, Buddhist Visual Literacy. And you can see from this, I love graphics by profession. I'm a graphic designer too. So I arranged this slide like this because you have Buddha Shakyamuni in his Bhumi Sparsa mudra, earth-touching mudra, which is the witness of his enlightenment. And so this is the vision of this presentation. And then below, hatching out of the lotus, we have what I like to call the Bodhisattva in the half shell. So perhaps that's each and every one of us here, or perhaps there's someone here that's like Buddha Shakyamuni. But so we see the awakened heart is not only can be a resultant state, but it's also a process. So that was the reason for this slide. So tonight we'll look at the key points of how do we express what is inexpressible, and that doesn't just refer to being awakened or enlightenment. Earlier today, a friend of ours had a birthday and we were eating cake at a cafe, and there were many different kinds of cake. And we went around the table and asked each person to describe, what does your cake taste like? And it was really interesting because the descriptions were beautiful with words and evocative, but there's no way that we could know what the cake tasted like. So we have these inexpressible experiences all the time, and yet we share them. We attempt to share them. So how does one express the inexpressible? And particularly, how does one convey awakening and enlightenment as demonstrated by Buddha Shakyamuni? How is that experientiable? So Tarthang, oh, sorry, I've got the slides up on my computer. Could you put up the next slide, please? So Tarthang Tulku has a lovely quote from an older book published in 1987 called Art of Enlightenment, A Perspective on the Sacred Art of Tibet. And I think sometimes when we think about Buddhist art, perhaps for many of us here, I know for me, I tend to default in my mind when I hear Buddhist visual literacy, I immediately go to Tibetan art. Thangkas, beautiful rupas, murals and gompas, things like that. However, in Buddhism, the arts cover a lot more than Tibetan art, Tibetan Buddhist art. But I like this quote in particular because it brings the mystery, I suppose, of enjoying a piece of art that appears to you, that just really engages you. So he says, art enters the realm of the sacred when it transcends personal and cultural expressions and mirrors the deeper levels of our mind. Art has the power to illuminate dimensions of consciousness inaccessible to our physical senses. It can awaken our most subtle perceptions and show us the true nature of our being. Next slide, please. And here is a palette cleanser. It's interesting because if I say next slide, I think people expect there to be an image, right? It shows how our mind leads our sight a lot of the time. So I thought we'd start with a little bit of actually doing the practice of Buddhist visual literacy, which is actually described a little bit in the descriptions of the science of creativity in the arts. And you can find descriptions of those all over the place. And if anybody is interested in particular sources outside of the Treasury of Knowledge, you can ask me later or email me and I will answer, I promise. I also have a visual bibliography not that I'll give it out today, but if anybody wants that, they can have it. So with this lovely, not a green screen, a blue screen, if you're not feeling already settled, seated pleasantly, please just relax and enjoy sitting there. And while you're sitting here or there, you can, whatever works best for you, you can let your eyes be unfocused or like daydreamy, or you can close your eyes, but feel the air on your skin. And you can let sounds appear. Just let your senses receive. And while you're letting your senses receive, we'll change to the next slide, please. And just let your eyes rest on this image without trying to figure anything out about it. Just let it be in your visual field. And continue to feel the air, hear the sounds. I feel badly for breaking in at this moment, but just note how you might feel briefly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 5 sciences as they're presented in the Treasury of Knowledge by Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Tai. So it said that the 5 sciences constitute a complete education in the classical Buddhist and also Hindu world. And these were taught, for instance, at Nalanda University. One of the interesting things about the 5 sciences is that they are based necessarily in terms of how you can categorize them and how you can describe them and the order in which they're studied through body, speech, and mind. So the 5 sciences are the science of creativity and the arts, which is what we'll talk about tonight. The second one is the science of health and well-being. The third one is the science of sound or expression or communication. And then the fourth one is the science of logic and reasoning, or putting forth statements. And the fifth one is called the inner science of the mind, or what we might call metaphysics. And this is where the view of Buddhism that we think of per se is presented. However, it's said that you start with the science of creativity and the arts because you need to have a basic working understanding of the elements, how the elements constitute your experience of self and all of what you experience. So this science is basically about acknowledging the fundamental contact between the raw elements and our physical existence. So often in Buddhist teachings, the example of pottery is given. So in keeping with pottery, but maybe not a pillar or a vase, we'll just do pottery this time. For instance, in pottery, you work with the raw element of clay. So this is the outside elemental contact with your hands and your raw, fresh mind. There's a basic communication between the inner state of your physical body and the outer physical experience of the universe. So although your activity is directed by mind, this activity is expressed through your body and the physicality of what you're encountering. And Jamgon Kongtrul goes on to says that although the arts that can be earnestly pursued are limitless, all knowledge, this is a big statement, all knowledge, in fact, may be subsumed within the fine arts of the 3 media. So the Treasury of Knowledge says that that all of the Buddhist teachings are presented through the words of the Buddha, through commentaries written by realized people on the words of the Buddha, and the fine arts. Whoever says that? Has anybody heard that? It's in the Treasury of Knowledge. It's really interesting. And so the fine arts constitute what Jamgon Kongtrul calls mundane fine arts and supramundane. So mundane isn't a downgraded form of art. It's actually the skill of working with the elements and making something that's practical, useful, beautiful, workable. And the supramundane arts are based on representations of the body, speech, and mind of the Buddha, of an enlightened being, but in particular, the Buddha. And the supramundane arts then, when engaged in, turn what we call the 3 media, our creative palette, our body, speech, and mind, with the elements, turns that into the supreme media of body, speech, and mind. So all of us sitting here are a creative palette of the supreme media of body, speech, and mind right now. If we're engaging, for instance, in pursuing the Buddhist path or being here in the moment and being awake to what's happening. So our body, speech, and mind are the palette of creativity. And as said, to be supreme, they're expressions of the awake nature, the expressions of Buddha, outwardly and inwardly. So this is the purpose of Buddhist art, to be an expression of awakening that evokes the same for the person engaging with it in whatever mode that might be, whether they're making it or whether they are interacting with it, whether they're viewing it. And so, the next slide, please. I'm sure people have heard this. This is from the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. Buddha said that all beings possess the nature of Buddha. And here, just as an aside, this is a tanka that just depicts the Buddha's previous lives. It shows the Jataka, scenes from the Jataka tales. So I think this is an interesting image to juxtapose with this statement, all beings possess the nature of Buddha. So the fact that all beings possess the nature of Buddha makes Buddhist art possible. It makes the intention of it possible. If this were not true, then it would just be like any kind of rhetoric or some kind of presentation that doesn't have a fixed reality to it. I know that's a dangerous statement to make, but I'm making it because there's the quote. So in juxtaposition to this, we have Buddha Shakyamuni, again with the earth-touching mudra, flanked by his two attendants. And we have all the scenes, many scenes from the Jataka tales. So what this implies is that through all of the Buddha's previous lives, no matter what happened, no matter what the expression of those lives were, that heart of awakening was his nature. And it culminated in this expression of Buddha Shakyamuni, the Buddha of our time. So this is a really key point. So because reality and the experience of it expresses itself, as the Buddha taught, as an ever-shifting flotilla of conditions relatively appearing to our experience as seeming causes with results that have some kind of meaning and patterning. For instance, the play that we identify with as our life and world, then our interpretation and experience is endlessly creative. So from the presentation of how creativity in the arts is presented, the very fact of experiencing something is creative in and of itself. There's all these different causes and conditions coming together that include the all of the elements as well as consciousness. So that is being conscious about this and skilled in it is the art of creativity. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. So I think I just said this. All things without exception arise from causes and conditions, which is what the Buddha taught. And because all things depend on such, they are impermanent, interdependent, and in flux. So being really aware of this when we encounter Buddhist art is extremely helpful. When we want to consciously experience something, the first thing is to have like the palate cleanser, to bring your body, speech, and mind together, to relax in the present moment and open one's senses. So all things includes your body and state of mind at any given moment. So for this palette of creativity to be present, one needs to bring oneself to whatever it is one is engaging with. Could we have the next slide, please? So in the Treasury of Knowledge, I know this is a rather dry verse because it says study, study, study for about 4 lines, but I actually like this verse because if you, the purpose of all knowledge, or as Johnston says, the purpose of the pursuit of all knowledge is to develop the mind that progressively knows the awakened state. And that mind that progressively knows the awakened state is called prajna. So the purpose of any study or any focus or any engagement that is intentional is the development of prajna. And this is what this verse is about. Through study, all things are known. Through study, negative actions are reversed. Through study, pointless pursuits are abandoned. Through study, nirvana is attained. So study here means to be in a receptive state that's noticing what one is receiving without actually directing things too much. And this is juxtaposed with the wheel of life because the wheel of life is an encapsulation of the Buddha's basic teachings, how we are endlessly creative. I mean, this is literally how we're endlessly creative. That's what it teaches. And how we can apply that creative talent, which just doesn't go away, to things that aren't confused, to a life that's not trapped in suffering and confusion and perpetuating that for other people, which that's no fun. So the art or skillful means of Buddhist artwork is simply not possible without the presence of a human body and a human mind. It's especially effective when the body and mind are open and relaxed, receptive with some alertness of simple noting. So this simple noting is really simple. It's kind of like checking the weather, but not with the weather app. It's like checking the weather by actually going outside or opening a window and sticking your arm out the window. And you're like, what does it feel like? So you sense and feel, what is it? What's going on? Rather than something telling you. I was looking for my phone. I actually have it put away. I can look at my computer. Rather than something telling you. So you're actually perceiving it directly. So you're tuning into the outer and inner environment, both. So according to the Buddha, humans belong to the realm of desire, which probably everybody knows is in this image is up at 1 or 2 o'clock there. So because we belong to the realm of desire, we're powered by desire. It's called the realm of desire because that's our mark. That's what actually moves us, motivates us, causes activity. So we desire to know, desire to experience, longing for something, desiring to have something, really wanting something, or really not wanting something, not wanting to engage in something. So things like that. So this desire is like a basic motor. It's like what keeps it's our Energizer bunny battery. So being wise to this dynamic and motivation as expressions of awakening marks the difference between one's body, speech, and mind as just plain old going through cyclic existence to mediums of creativity that are supreme. So supreme body, speech, and mind, whether we are creating art or whether we're interacting with art. So this means that art objects are an expression of Buddha or awake. It means that the art of making art or making art is also an expression of Buddha or awake. And it means that the art of reading is also an expression of awake, of reading art. And this a very nice quote that I'll soon stop talking so much and we'll look at more images. I like this quote. This is from Punlap Rinpoche about the science of creativity in the arts and how skillful and creative it can be. The basic communication between the inner state of the physical body and the outer physical existence of the universe involves synchronizing heart with mind using great insight. Through such synchronization, creativity naturally arises and expresses itself, for instance, as a beautiful image, a beautiful world. So you can see that what is the scope of art and creativity here? It is the totality of our experience, which is, I think that's quite nice. Nice way to walk about. So could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is a juxtaposition. So what's the reference point for Buddhist art? What is the content of Buddhist art? The Buddha's life and his teachings. So we have two thangkas here in Tibetan Buddhist style. So this isn't going to be so much of an art history lesson or a like, I'm going to decode a thangka for you because that's a way longer thing. But to the left, I'm sure people have seen many life story thangkas based on the Buddha's life. So this is one based on the Buddha's life, Shakyamuni Buddha, as our reference point for humans in the desire realm in this day and age. And then we have the a representation of his teachings, which he actually, some of you probably have heard me say this a lot, but I love this fact. He actually dictated how to make this. So the Buddha dictated how to condense his teachings into visual imagery. So it's like the first awake infographic. It's also a lovely example of one of the trends in art today, where you have conceptual art that is when a gallery buys the art, what they're buying is a set of blueprints with instructions that say, here's the list of material, here's the sizes, here's the placement, here's where you put it. And that piece, same piece, can be bought and sold and exhibited in many different museums throughout the world. But it is the conceiving of it and then the execution of it that is the art. This is very interesting. So the Wheel of Life was what the Buddha dictated in response to his main student's request, which was probably not a complaint, but more like reporting facts. Like you can't be everywhere all the time in your body. And there's lots of people who are really interested in your teachings. So please, could you do something? And so this is what he did. He dictated this, the encapsulation of his teachings. And so if you really dig into this, as probably many people have here, it unfolds everything. I mean, it's really great. Yes, but this is not a talk on the Wheel of Life. So what is the reference point for Buddha's art? His life and his teachings. Could we have the next slide, please? But the reason I want to, it seems really obvious to say, what's the reference point for Buddhist art? Buddha's life and his teachings. It does seem quite obvious, right? But so why point that out? So the Buddha taught and teaches that to know an object or to know something without being mistaken as to its nature, so knowing without being mistaken as to the nature of an object is the mind of prajna in action. There must be something that can be referred to in three ways. And this is a really key point. By its name or label, through an accurate definition that belongs specifically to its name and label, and most importantly, that both of those refer to something that can be pointed to as the basis. In other words, you can't just make it up. So these three things, this triad, is what makes something that you can refer to and know authentic. This is really important. This is actually taught in the classifications of mind, which is a basic text that you would study at the beginning of Shedra. So here, what is our authentic? What is authentic for us? It is the life of the Buddha and his teachings. So it cannot be made up. This is always the ground zero of teachings, and teachings in the form of Buddhist art. Whether they're whether it's a condensation in terms of like the Wheel of Life infographic, or whether it's a beautiful rupa of the Buddha Shakyamuni. This rupa, by the way, on the right, as many people know, you can see it in Patan, in the museum there. It's beautiful. So why did I put this slide together like this? Because basically you have this, we have this basic nature that can blossom. We can be bodhisattvas on the half shell. And we can have this resultant state that has been demonstrated by the life of Buddha Shakyamuni. But as this hand by a Japanese master, which is his statement of enlightenment, it's hands-on. It's like direct contact. It's not theoretical. So art, experiencing Buddhist art, making it, reading it, enjoying it, is direct. It's not theoretical. However, there's there can be great benefit in understanding the culture, the intended messaging, the arrangement of symbols and so on, as another level of unpacking the experience of something. So you have the direct experience, and you have the view or the learned experience also. So it's important, this triad really is important, because that means that the meaning can be read accurately as intended, or it can be mistaken. So there's a reference point. And as anything that we know, even if it's read accurately, there's varying depths of meaning. So it hits us in different ways at different times. So Buddha Shakyamuni is our illustrating example, our ideal, not in the sense of something mythical or a shaggy dog story of excellence, but rather as a true example of the best of realization and activity for a human being. So this really is a hands-on affair. Okay. So we'll having said all that, perhaps it is time to look at the blue screen again. So maybe we could have the next slide, please. All right, it's the blue screen. So as we did at the beginning, please settle pleasantly, and I'll put up another slide in a second. And just let your eyes fall on the next image. Don't try to do anything. Just let your senses receive while letting your eyes rest on this image. Don't try to figure anything out about it. Of course, if that happens, that's fine. And we're going to look at this image a second time, and you see what comes next. And then you notice that. So rather than imposing our thoughts upon what we're looking at immediately, I'm sure many of us have now identified this, perhaps have a story about it, maybe even some wishes around it, who knows what else. And then the third time you look to see what you didn't see before. So this is where you actually start purposely engaging the mind that will conceptually explore this, that wants to make meaning of it, that wants to make sense of it, wants to know the message. So basically, in Buddhist visual literacy, when you're reading an image, there's a method. So the method has 3 steps. So simple presence and receiving of information, then noting of experience in relation to the image, and then the final step after that, if you really want to get into the image and unpack all of what was intended in it, and perhaps maybe even you work in a museum or something, or you like to explore art and its meaning and what it reveals, then you would engage in research. How was it made? What's it for? What are the cultural references in it? And all that kind of sleuthing that one might do. So that's the method. And then the mechanics involves what we were just trying or tasting earlier, which is basically letting your perception be open to the image, which means letting your eyes be open to the image and noticing when you have a label. So that's just going to happen. But instead of leading with labeling and identifying, you lead with letting the information come to your senses. And this is for instance, in the classifications of mind, the mind that receives sense data without adulteration is called a direct valid cognizer. So valid here isn't a psychological judgment. Valid here means from the Buddha's realized perspective. If you were to describe how we experience objects, what is a direct valid cognizer experiences its sense object without mistake. So in other words, if we see a lot of pink here, we see it very directly before we start going into pink petals or whatever they are. You'd think I could see with my glasses on. Pink petals and, pink reflection under the tree and Bodh Gaya and Bodhi tree and Buddha and offerings and all sorts of things. Who knows what people came up with. And when you look in this way, there is no right or wrong answer. It's just simply perceiving. That's it. That's the adventure there, is perceiving. So the mechanics of the method is to be as unmediated as possible, to really notice when you move into the mind that wants to know, and acknowledging that every moment of experience is shaped by causes and conditions. So if you are in a certain kind of mood, for instance, if you had just gotten food poisoning from like pink bubblegum, looking at this might evoke a visceral reaction, which hopefully it won't for anybody. That would be not nice. Or, for instance, if you'd been on pilgrimage recently, even if you didn't try and identify this, you might look at it and just kind of go, so how we are in a moment and what our environment is like this room is a little hot, a little stuffy, it's kind of like, well, it would be nice if the breeze from in there came through here or something like that, or, so what's happening in the present moment, the collection of how we are in this moment affects how we perceive and think about things. And that in turn is a reflection of our patterning. And and feeds into our patterning. So when looking at art or any form of communication, to be as barely and uncomplicatedly present as possible really facilitates the direct communication. Personally, this hasn't got to do with art, but when you sit quietly, you know, if you sit like just in shamatha or whatever, you're not really doing anything. That is the most direct form of communication possible in some ways, I think. Although we don't think of it as communication, but it is. There's an interaction. So I think that's kind of interesting. So you have the method and the mechanics. So in the method, basically you want to have your senses lead and then notice when narrative kicks in. So narrative in the senses asks, when you're looking at something, how does what you see generate meaning? How much of that you're seeing is not your narrative? And then based on that, contextual analysis asks, what was the original context for the image? How does that contribute to my understanding? What was its function? What does its form tell us about its function? So we can go into a lot of depth in that area, and that is not the scope of this talk. It's mainly talking about how reading art and how making art and how basically being ourselves and moving throughout the day is creativity. So if we could have the next slide, please. And the next slide. Again, another slide. This is all what I just said. So next slide, please. And next slide. And next slide. There. Okay. So we're back at the pink Bodh Gaya, as I call this image. So this symbolizes something, right? It symbolizes something different for each and every one of us. And who knows what that is? And it would be interesting to hear what it is for each person, but we can't really go into that right now. But it is a symbol of a place that we can refer to. Moreover, the symbol of the place that we can refer to is Bodh Gaya. And the symbol of Bodh Gaya is the Bodhi tree in the place of enlightenment for the Buddha. So it has a whole bunch of different layers of symbols. Could we have the next slide, please? So, of course, if we're going to talk about symbols, we have to go to Sinepa and Peep. Why not, right? So this is, if you study classifications of mind or, you know, any basic Shedra material, this is like a perfect image to launch into. So in order to communicate, symbols are necessary. So we often think that symbols are far more esoteric than they are. Symbols are really functional, necessary. We use them all the time in all sorts of ways, just by even calling something, as we see Magritte demonstrating so nicely in this painting, which is cut off. When we refer to something, we think it's the object. However, of course, if we did want to smoke a pipe, that would be difficult, right? But nonetheless, if we say this, look, here's a painting of a pipe, then we think pipe. But Magritte here is saying this is not a pipe, obviously. I mean, it's not the pipe that you can smoke, and also it's a painting and many other things. So we use the idea of something to represent the actual object, the object that we're referring to. And this goes to different levels. So could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so we have these kinds of symbols. We use these all the time. Mathematical symbols, you know, scientific symbols, financial symbols, commercial symbols based on the Bible, for instance, and we have emoticons, things like that. So we have symbols. I mean, these symbols are just embedded in our culture. So some of these symbols might not be familiar to everybody, but the symbols have a meaning and a practical function that's kind of set. So this is one kind of symbol. Obviously, letters, language, that's a symbol. And these represent much greater abstract ideas, just a plus symbol. A plus symbol can mean indicate a mathematical function. It can also mean and. So it can mean two things together. So its meaning has to be within context, but it indicates this is the function that you're going to think about. So it directs how our mind will think about it. So if we could have the next slide, please. And then we have symbols that are easy. I can say this is a clock, right? It's a clock. And we know that this is a clock. We know what clocks are. There's a clock there, here's a clock there. This is a very specific clock. This is a clock from the Deutsche Museum in Munich. And there's more to this clock. It's pretty cool. It tells time on all sorts of scales. So solar, lunar. It shows the astrological houses with their Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. It shows the phases of the moon. But basically, this represents time. Time is a gigantic, abstract concept. And yet, we can point to it. If we look at a span of time, what we perceive of as a span of time. But a clock symbolizes all of that. So we rely on symbols. It's just no getting around it. We absolutely cannot share the world together without symbols. So symbols are necessary. They stand in for the thing that can be pointed to, the basis of its label or name, its specific definition. So this is the way that we're tremendously creative. So in communication, sharing of knowledge and information, entertainment are completely reliant upon symbols and symbolizing. So symbolizing is creative in and of itself. For Buddhist visual literacy, effective communication, reading and creating works that are expressions of Buddha nature or bodhicitta, the mind of awakening, the language is necessarily rooted in the life of Buddha Shakyamuni and the culture of his time. So to get a basic lexicon to look at Buddhist art, at the very, very least, you need to know at least like the 4 main events in the Buddhist life. So if we could have the next slide, please. And I know everybody here probably knows these 4 main events. So this is, here's Shakyamuni Buddha. This is a Gandharan head of Shakyamuni Buddha. So could we have the next slide? So thank you. So the 4 main events in the Buddha's life that also relate to any person's awakening. So each person will go through these 4 events in their awakening. Is that 1, you're born. So here's the Buddha just after he was born, standing up, and there you can see him upright. So that's the first main event. And then the second one, next slide, please, is realization. However, it's said that realization it's categorized as one event. I find this really interesting because actually in Buddhist art depicting the Buddha's realization, there's actually just before, or the moment of, the moment right after, where he's calling the earth to witness, and then the moment right after that, when his hand comes up. So, which is, you can see these in Buddhist art, so you can tell what's happening or what the image is conveying in terms of what's happening in the connection to progressive enlightenment or enlightenment. So this first one is, I heard someone laugh a little bit. This is actually by the 10th Karmapa. Doesn't it look incredibly modern? I know you have this painting. I know, I love the 10th Karmapa. So this is the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree. being beset by the maras. So all of the things that we desire in the ways that are binding, that hold the mind that could progressively know our nature, our essence, hold the mind captive. They're like bandits, burglars, thieves, swindlers, all sorts of things. So this is the 10th Karmapa's version of the Buddha being beset by the maras. And if you ever have a chance to look at the 10th Karmapa's artwork, you'll see that he's very observant and seems to have a keenly loving eye for all beings, the way he depicts them. It's really quite interesting. Also, if you ever look at paintings of women by Modigliani, who came much later in time, you might notice a little bit of a correspondence. Perhaps Modigliani was influenced by the 10th Karmapa. So when Buddha was sitting under, Shakyamuni Buddha was, or Shakyamuni Gautama Siddhartha was sitting under the Bodhi tree, he was being beset by maras. He didn't move. He wasn't, his desire did not move him into confusion. His desire to know helped him remain. So could we have the next slide, please? And by contrast, this upper one is a Thai version of the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree being beset by maras. And you can see whenever the like forks and staves and arrows puncture the aura, they start turning into flowers. So all of these difficulties flower into their nature. And I personally keep this on my desktop because it makes me think of my daily life. But so this is a Thai version of that. And then underneath that, this is a portion of the railing around Sanchi's stupa. And if you look to the left, you'll see a tree with an empty seat under it. So at the time that this was made, the Buddha or Gautama Siddhartha was indicated, he was not indicated in the human form. He was indicated symbolically. Well, he's in the human form, he's symbolic, but not in a human symbolism. So this throne under the Bodhi tree means the Buddha sitting there. And then to the right, you can see this wonderful depiction, really graphic. I mean, this could be like a, illustrated comic series, or a really great stage production for the opera of Enlightenment. Anyways, those are all the maras, and that big one there is the king of the maras. So the mind of enlightenment defeats the king of the maras in this series. So this is Buddha. So this episode in Buddha's life, he's born, he discovers the nature of mind. And next slide, please. Under the Bodhi tree. Yeah. And so this is one more. So he's discovered the nature of mind. And this is a lovely piece because it combines two parts. It shows the Buddha sitting just after the moment of enlightenment, and he's smushing down the maras. Like if that seat was a sandwich, the filling would be maras, and he's smushing them down. He's touching the earth. He's like, yeah, this is my seat. All of this desire, all of these forms, this is my seat. Here it is. And he's even looking down. So I think this is a very nice combination. So you have Buddha under the Bodhi tree with the maras coming. Buddha realizes the nature of that, the nature, the essence of that, and calls the earth to witness when questioned about it. And then could I have the next slide, please? Oh, I forgot to include one slide, sorry. So there's also, right after the Bhumi Sparsa mudra, there's a depiction of the Buddha, which is one of the earliest figurative depictions of the Buddha, that right after he was touching the earth, his hand comes up and his left hand is still in meditation posture. So this gesture is like, hey, good news. It's like, so this is the second event. So the second event has 3 steps. And so this is the second event is enlightenment. When a bodhisattva reaches the first bhumi, it's said that when they're in meditative absorption, that realization of that bhumi occurs either in 1 moment or 16 consecutive moments. So I like this because it shows like it's the moment of enlightenment, and yet there's three parts, so to speak, even though it's one thing. So anyways, that's the second event. After the third event is based on, hey, good news, we have the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So we have this mudra associated with that, the teaching mudra. And many of you, if you've been to Sarnath, to the museum there, or looked at any of Gendon Chupal's drawings, if you're familiar with his drawings, he did a beautiful drawing of this. This is a representation of the Buddha's first teaching, which was said to take place at Sarnath or Deer Park. And if you look at, I don't know why this is cut off, but if you could see the bottom of this, you would see what looks like a lozenge like this, sticking out right at the bottom with 3 beings, people on either side. So it's a wheel turned rim out. So, oops. So it's a wheel turned rim out. So the wheel represents the first turning of the teachings. And the wheel has a very extensive symbolism in Buddhism. But when you see the wheel, it basically means that it represents the teachings, it represents the pervasiveness and possibility of enlightenment and the unceasing activity of enlightenment, which is in and of itself the natural expression of compassion. So all Buddhist art is, in a sense, a lovely representation of that. It's a way to connect with that. And with each, oh, right, next slide, please. Sorry, I get excited about these things. Okay, parinirvana. This is a late Japanese painting, and this is just a section of it. But what's interesting about this is it shows the position or the mudra for the Buddha's parinirvana. But if you can see that it's highly emotive. The animals are wailing and thrashing on the ground. The people there are sad or upset or angry, except for there's one monk sitting there at the lower right side of the platform, and you can see the back of his bald head. So he's just there as witness. It's like, yes, the teachings of impermanence. So the fourth episode in the Buddha's life is passing into parinirvana, demonstration of impermanence. But this is a very interesting point in the life of the Buddha and also Buddhist art, because you have references to these events in the Buddha's life, as well as the 8 other major events, and then there's minor events. You have these references that appear throughout all sorts of Buddhist art, and even if it's not a depiction of the Buddha. But as we all know, especially if you think of Tibetan Buddhist art, you have a proliferation of anthropomorphized symbols appearing in human-esque form or combination human-animal that really clearly are not the Buddha, right? Like multi-headed, different colors, you know, semi-wrathful, very wrathful, female, really, really old, I don't know, all different things. So After the Buddha died, excuse me, could we have the next slide, please? Okay, after the Buddha died, there was a council. I'm really abbreviating this, and you can get completely accurate information on all of this, but just to keep the thread going. After the Buddha died, his relics were taken, and to keep the wheel turning, to give the illustrating example, the real referent object, is said that his relics were divided into 8 and placed into 8 stupas. And so Sanchi is one of those early stupas. And from an art history perspective, this is a fascinating monument to explore, because it was built from 50 BCE to the 3rd century CE. So the range of art and symbolism that it covers is very important, pivotal, actually. So this stupa, then the stupa and the round shape of the stupa and the circumambulating, the turning of the wheel, that has the life force of the Buddha as a relic in its center. This came to represent the Buddha's mind. But it's the physical form of the Buddha's mind. So because then we could have something like a stupa, and could we have the next slide, please? Thanks. So during the Buddha's life, on the left, he's teaching arhats. So this is during his life. He's teaching arhats, and arhats will then protect and uphold the teachings. After the Buddha died, or even during his life, on the right-hand slide, he's in a Sambhogakaya realm, in a pure realm, teaching the 8 great bodhisattvas. So this is while he was alive, as well as after he demonstrated passing into parinirvana. So what is important about this is that you have an ideal principle that can be communicated without the body of Buddha Shakyamuni being present. This is really important. This liberates then, if we go to the next slide. Oh, oops. Okay. We'll just stay there for a sec. But it liberates the anthropomorphizing of form from just the Buddha. So it means then that the various types of compassionate activity can then be anthropomorphized into different forms, different genders, different animals, different objects. And then there's a whole bunch of symbolism that just starts proliferating. And you get into iconography, what that means. But the basic vocabulary for reading Buddhist art is rooted in those 4 events. So lotuses, wheels, trees, Buddha Shakyamuni, his footprint, a throne, a deer facing each other. So in this slide, although this footprint here is actually from the 12th century, as I said many before, during the Buddha's life and shortly after his parinirvana, it is said that, although in Tibetan Buddhist art history, it's a little different, but in general, it's said that the Buddha was not displayed in a human form. He was always referred to by symbol. And this symbol on the left is very nice. It's the footprint of the Buddha with the wheel in the middle and scenes from his life. And then on the right, we have our lovely friend from the museum in Patan, which is so expressive. The one thing I would say, iconographically unusual in this Buddha is the earrings. I don't know if anybody noticed that. When the Buddha left the palace, he gave up all his jewels. When he sat under the Bodhi tree, he had no jewels on. But in this particular style of art from this time and kingdom, the Buddha is always depicted with earrings. So it's not a mistake, it's particular to this style. But mainly you would see the Buddha without earrings. And that's why we have these long slits, as most people know. So in our day and age, what is the symbol of enlightenment? if I just show you an outline of this seated form with the ushnish, or the bump on the head, even if I showed it to you in outline, everybody would probably say, oh, Buddha, oh, peace, love, enlightenment, I don't know, or, awake, or something like that. Or, boy, I'd like to see a much nicer image of that. But so the Buddha, interestingly, is almost like for most people who connect to media of some sort or another, is almost a universal symbol. I find that fascinating. It's really interesting, as are, for instance, the outline of a cat. So I don't know how interesting that is too, and plus signs, so we have a range. But it's amazing that we could do something like that we can share in that way. So I think I'm going to stop here. Oh, except for if you could please, Olaf, if you could go to slide 31. I'm skipping a bunch of slides. I'm sorry, I made too much material. If you want to explore this further, I made an extra exploration. If you want to take this away, again, Magritte, because visually he's so poetic. So if you want to explore narrative and the senses, then you can use this lovely verse from the concise Prajnaparamita Sutra, which I think Carl actually referred to in his talk recently. This one, beings usually speak of seeing the sky. Examine this point of how you see the sky. So that means sitting very plainly, barely, openly, and receptively. The Buddha taught that the seeing of phenomena is just like this. So all phenomena is just like this. So you can explore that using this method, see what you find. And then another way you can experiment this is any time of the day, maybe when your phone beeps or something, you can ask yourself, am I seeing what is really there? Or am I seeing my idea of what is there? So learning to distinguish between that is key. And then a variation with this verse from the concise Prajnaparamita Sutra is, in the verse, replace seeing the sky with any phenomena that you can sense. You can try this with anything. Anyways, so that's if you want to take it out into the field and take this for a spin. So we're all bodhisattvas on the half shell, applying ourselves to this, oh, sorry, next slide, please. to applying ourselves to this great adventure of awakening, which we know is possible, right? Because of the example. And then when we receive the teachings and we really digest them and apply them to our experience, we can see for ourselves if we think, yes, this is hands-on, or no, this is somebody's, doing some good marketing. Because of my graphic design background, when I first started studying the basic Shedra texts, I thought, wow, the Buddha is the most amazing and convincing marketer in the world, because you sell yourself on it. You apply the teachings and you find it out for yourself. So if we could have the next slide, please. So in sum, after all this blabbing, one could say that creativity is the alchemy of awakening. And I would just like to just offer one verse. This is actually a verse that is used when you debate, but I changed the debate language so that it goes with creativity and expression. So the verse, when translated, says, when engaging in creativity, one's motivation should be pure, one's expression even and clear, and one's demeanor gentle and pleasing. And then finally, I'd like to make an aspiration, and this is from Khenpo Tsiltrim Gyamtso Rinpoche. And I think that this neatly summarizes the interplay of elements, seen and unseen, and the creative culmination of them in any instance. In the sky of view, free from elaboration, may the clouds of compassion gather. Through the power of the continuous rain of blessings, may the harvests of disciples ripen. So I thank all of you for coming this evening, and particularly for Diane and also Olaf, thank you, for this collective and ongoing opportunity to explore creativity and awakening. What a wonderful series. And to all of us as participants in this exploration. And I wish you all very good creative adventures. So thank you. Right, and it's late. I'm sorry. If there's, I meant to ask if there was questions, but I think we have to stop, right?
It's up to you. We can have a couple of questions.
But I don't want to keep people in a hot, stuffy room any longer than they want to in the evening. But if there's like, if someone has a burning one question or anything, and if not, no worries. Okay. Oh, Renee, okay. No.
Beyond. Thank you, Stephanie.
Oh,
It's on?
Yep.
I was just curious if Jamyang Control in the Treasury of Knowledge, I appreciate the way that you tied in the Lorick or the classifications of mind with the creativity. Does Jamyang Control talk about that as well, or is that something?
yeah, the discussion of creativity in the arts. Okay, well, it's the Treasury of Knowledge. So you have to have the big overview of the Treasury of Knowledge. So he's talking about the 5 sciences and how everything can be known, and particularly in the Buddhist path. So in the list of the science of creativity in the arts, in the supramundane arts, it's divided into 3 sections: body, speech, and mind. Like supreme body, supreme speech, supreme mind. Within supreme body, it's divided into body, speech, and mind, representations of the Buddha. So, which is interesting. Physical representations of speech, physical representations of mind, as well as what we think of as in general as Buddhist art. And then the other, so like the supreme speech and supreme mind. So within supreme mind is a loophole. So mundane, or like the ordinary art of mind as a medium, is all of the fields of knowledge, study of all of the fields of knowledge. That's just regular. Supramundane is the knowledge of all of the Buddhist teachings, as well as the methods of meditation, the rituals of meditation. So that means the form of meditation. So the precision that's needed for that and those teachings. So yes, it would include those pramana teachings. Jamgon Control himself does not come out and say overtly, it's a very collective statement. But if you see where it falls in the Treasury of Knowledge, and how what makes our medium, our body, speech, and mind, our creative palette supreme, how he describes that is that you would necessarily need to understand. Now, how you came to that understanding is each person's thing, but you would need to understand the mechanics of perception and conception. And those are specifically taught nicely in Pramana, Abhidharma. And they're also in the sort of like the foundational teachings of Shedra. I mean, you kind of need them to explore these things. And the benefit of that, actually, as someone who's not particularly academic, but who's extraordinarily curious, is that you can use them for precision in experiential exploration in any given moment. And so by doing that, you can see whether the tenet systems that are given progressively, the progressed view of the tenet systems, you can actually check that out yourself and see, oh, okay. oh, I could see why this is being said this way. You may not fully, I'm not saying that, one fully realizes it or that I do or anything, but you can see, yes, there's a veracity to this. There's a basis for this. So this is what I love about those kinds of teachings. And this is also what I love about attempting to communicate anything, and particularly in the form of art. And that kind of creativity, you need to know the mechanics of it. So I think that's a long answer to, there's parts of the Treasury of Knowledge that talk about that, but not, other than being referred to in the science of creativity and the arts, they're not taught specifically in that section.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. I think that's probably good. Probably everybody's really tired, but again, thank you very much, everybody. And if you ever like discussing these things, or you have questions, or I don't know, you can email me. I'm slow to answer, but I will answer. So feel free. Again, thank you.